Some places don't let you leave the way you arrived. You go in whole. You come out missing something you can't name. Something that stayed behind in the dark between the trees. Something that is still up there right now. Watching the window you used to sit beside, waiting for the next person who thinks solitude is the same thing as being alone. It isn't. Before we begin, drop a comment right now. If you were completely alone on a mountain for 5 months, and something started watching you from the forest, would you stay or would you leave? Let me see it. What you are about to hear tonight are 2 accounts, 2 different people, 2 different mountains, 2 different years, the same forest, and the same patient, watching, waiting presence that has been there longer than either of them, longer than the towers they lived in, longer than any record anyone has kept of what happens to the people who spend enough time in that silence to be noticed. Part 1. The Watcher. My name is Robert Hale. I need to tell you who I am before I tell you what happened to me, because the kind of person I am is the reason I know what I experience was real. I worked construction for 15 years, concrete and steel, blueprints and load calculations, a world of things that exist because physics demands it, things you can measure, test, verify. I am not imaginative. I am not anxious. I have no psychiatric history of any kind. I am the last person who should believe in something he cannot explain, which is exactly why what happened to me on Klingman's domain the summer of 2009 has never left me. Klingman's Dome, 643 feet. On the Tennessee-North Carolina border deep in the Great Smoky Mountains, the fire lookout tower there sits on a steel framework, a 10-by-10 cabin, with 360-degree windows showing you nothing but sky and an endless green ocean of ancient forest in every direction. The nearest ranger station, 12 miles down a gravel road, the nearest town, 40 minutes by car. During fire season, you work alone. My shift, May through September. A supply driver named Gary came up twice a week on a narrow mountain road. Otherwise, I was the only breathing thing at that elevation for miles in any direction. And the job itself is simple. You sit in the tower. You watch for smoke. You document weather every morning. You keep the radio on channel 16 listening for dispatch. Most of the work is waiting. Most of the waiting is silence. Most people think. That's the hard part. The silence. It isn't. The first month went fine. I brought books. I kept detailed notes. I settled into the routine the way a practical man does, by making the unfamiliar familiar as quickly as possible. I was good at the job. I was good at the silence. And then, I started noticing that the silence had something in it. I started small. I'd be sitting at my desk logging weather data, and I'd have the sensation that something was looking at me through one of the windows. Not looking in my direction. Not a casual glance. Looking at me specifically. There is a difference between being in someone's line of sight and being the object of someone's attention. You can feel that difference. Every human being can feel it. It is one of the oldest instincts our species has, the ability to detect when something has chosen you as its focus. That instinct was screaming. I turned to look. Nothing, just forest, just the endless rolling mountains covered in green stretching to the horizon in every direction. But the feeling didn't stop. It would linger for an hour after I first noticed it, like something had been staring and looked away just before I turned. I mentioned it to Gary on the next delivery day. He'd been driving supplies to lookout towers for 6 years. He listened while I described it. The specific feeling of being watched. He didn't laugh. He didn't dismiss me. He just said, "You see anything? Any movement? Any signs?" I said no. He nodded slowly. The good ones don't show themselves. He unloaded the supplies, he left. I didn't ask him what he meant by that. I didn't want to know the answer. But the feeling didn't stop. It got worse. By early July, I started noticing something about the trees. the topmost branches of the tallest trees in the immediate ring surrounding the tower. They were angled slightly downward toward the cabin. Not all the branches, specifically the highest ones. As if they had been bent or trained to look inward, I climbed down and checked. The branches weren't bent, they weren't forced, they were growing naturally. But the geometry was consistent across multiple trees, in multiple directions, a complete ring of attention directed at the small structure where I lived. I told myself it was pattern recognition. The human brain does that. We find patterns because survival depends on it. But the feeling of being watched didn't respond to rational explanations the way rational feelings do. It intensified. I started keeping personal notes, separate from the official log. I documented the times the feeling was strongest. I was looking for a pattern, maybe a specific time of day, maybe a connection to weather, maybe something I could pin to a logical cause. There was no pattern. The feeling was random, or at least, it seemed random to me. But it never stopped completely. It would ease for a few hours, then return. And then I started hearing it. Late July. Sitting in the tower around 8 in the evening, just after sunset. Radio on low. Weather clear. I was reading, and I heard someone humming outside the tower. Slow, distant, coming from somewhere below the platform, probably from the forest floor about 50 feet away. Just a few notes repeating, a simple melody I couldn't identify. Nothing I recognized. I stood up. The humming stopped immediately. I went to the window, looked down at the forest, at the dark mass of trees and undergrowth below the tower. Listened. Nothing. I convinced myself it was the wind. Wind through dense forest can produce sounds that resemble humming. It's a known acoustic phenomenon. But I knew it wasn't the wind. My hands were shaking slightly when I sat back down. The next night, I heard it again. Different location. The humming was coming from the opposite side of the tower. Same slow tempo. Same 3 or 4 repeating notes. But this time, it lasted longer. 15 seconds. Maybe more. Long enough for me to understand that it was intentional. It was produced by something creating music, not by accident, but as a choice, as a, oh, bye. I stood up. The humming stopped immediately, and now I understood something new. It was aware of me. It heard me move. It reacted to my reaction. That is not a reflex. That is not an instinct. That is intelligence. I called the ranger station. I told them I'd heard what sounded like a person outside the tower at night. 2 nights in a row, the ranger who responded asked the standard questions. His tone told me something. The questions didn't. He had received this call before. He said they'd DOA perimeter check. He asked if the presence felt threatening. I said no. I said it felt observant. It felt curious. He didn't ask me to clarify that distinction. 2 rangers came up the next morning, flashlights and a perimeter map. They searched the forest within a quarter mile of the tower. They found nothing. No footprints. No disturbed vegetation. No sign of human or animal activity. They were professional about it, but they weren't surprised. Before they left, the younger one asked me, "You planning to stay on through end of season?" I said yes. I'd committed to September. He nodded. The older ranger, a man named Michael, didn't look at me. He was staring out at the forest. The humming didn't happen again for 3 days. The feeling of being watched eased slightly. I started to believe that maybe the ranger visit had deterred whatever was out there. I was wrong. On the 4th night, I heard footsteps on the metal stairs that led up to the platform. Slow, deliberate. Starting at the bottom, where the stairs emerge from the forest, and climbing upward, each footfall distinct, each step ringing out on the metal like an announcement. I am here. I am coming closer. The stairs are narrow and steep. A full climb from forest floor to the top platform takes about a minute. The footsteps came at a slow, patient pace. I stood up from my chair. The door was locked. but just a standard interior lock. It would not stop anyone who was determined. The footsteps continued. 8, 9, 10. 1 foot after another, metal ringing with each contact. I went to the window, looked down the stairs. I couldn't see anyone. The darkness was complete below the tower's outer light. No silhouette, no visible shape climbing toward me. But the footsteps kept coming. 12, 13, 14, halfway up now. I moved to the door, checked the lock again, stood there as the footsteps climbed higher, and then stopped. They stopped a trolley 3/4 of the way up the stairs, about 8 feet below the platform entrance. 3 seconds of silence. Then a new sound. The sound of something, someone, leaning against the metal railing. The sound of weight settling against steel. And beneath it, breathing, in and out, slow and deliberate. The breathing of something that wanted me to know it was there, that wanted me to hear it breathe. I was standing at that door. Every rational thought was screaming at me to open it, to look, to see what was on those stairs, but my body refused the command. The breathing continued, in and out, patient, unhurried, and then it stopped. I waited. 5 seconds. 10:30. Nothing. I opened the door. I looked down the stairs. They were empty, completely empty. From the platform all the way down into the darkness below. Nothing that could have made those footsteps. Nothing that could have made that breathing sound. I stood in that open doorway for a long time. The night air was cold. The forest was silent. And I understood, with a certainty that went deeper than thought, that whatever I had heard on those stairs had not climbed back down and disappeared into the forest. It had never physically climbed the stairs at all. I closed the door, I locked it. I sat in a chair in the middle of the cabin facing the door, and I did not move until sunrise. Hey, Brian. I called Michael first thing in the morning, told him everything. The footsteps, the breathing, the empty stairs. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he didn't offer to come back out. He didn't suggest calling anyone else. He asked me one question. Do you feel like it's trying to hurt you? I said no. I said it felt like something was trying to communicate, like it was testing the boundaries between us. There was a long pause. Then Michael said, "Stay in the tower, lock the doors. Don't go outside alone, especially not at night. If something happens that makes you feel genuinely endangered, call us immediately. Otherwise, keep logging everything." I asked him what he thought was happening. He said, "I don't know, but you're not the first person to report it." I stayed through August. I didn't hear the footsteps again. I didn't hear the humming. But the feeling of being watched never subsided. It was a constant low pressure in the back of my awareness, always present, never absent, always patient. I noticed one thing in those final weeks that I haven't mentioned to anyone. The feeling was different depending on where I was in the cabin. Strongest near the west-facing windows, weaker in the kitchen where the windows were smaller, almost absent in the back bedroom. That pattern told me something a practical construction man could understand. Whatever was watching me had a preferred position, a specific location in the surrounding forest where it could observe the cabin most effectively, and it returned to that location regularly. I never looked directly at that location. I never walked out toward it. I wasn't brave enough, and I wasn't foolish enough. In September, Gary drove me down the mountain on the last day. On the way down, without me saying anything, he said one thing. "You'll feel normal again in a few weeks. That's how it is. The isolation does strange things to your mind. Takes time for your mind to understand that the isolation is over." He was partially right. I did feel more normal as the weeks passed. I returned to my apartment in Knoxville. Went back to regular work, went back to other people, but I never felt completely normal again. There's a part of me that never came down from that mountain, a part that is still sitting in that cabin at night, listening to the radio, feeling the attention of something in the darkness outside the west-facing window, something patient, something that understood exactly how long it could watch before I would have to acknowledge what I was experiencing. I never went back to fire lookout work. I've never returned to that tower. I've never driven past the road that leads up to Klingman's dome. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I had opened that door, if I had climbed out onto that platform and looked down the stairs. Would I have seen something, or would the stairs have been exactly as empty as they appeared? I think about that question more than I should. And I think, some questions once answered, never stop asking themselves again. But here's what I need you to hold on to is before I tell you about the second account. Robert was on that mountain in 2009. The woman in the second story, she was on a different tower, 6 miles east. In 2015, 6 years later. Different person, different tower, same forest. And what she heard through her radio suggests that whatever was watching Robert had been there long before he arrived, and was still there long after he left. Part 2. The Signal. My name is Claire Donovan. I want to explain who I was before I tell you what I heard, because who I was is the reason I almost convinced myself I hadn't heard it. I was a therapist for 6 years. I spent those 6 years sitting across from people in crisis, listening carefully, speaking carefully, maintaining the kind of professional neutrality that costs something. Every single day, you practice it. By the time I applied for the lookout position, I was empty, not broken, not damaged, just completely empty, from 6 years of giving without replenishment. I needed silence. I needed distance. A fire lookout tower seemed like the perfect solution. I was right about that, for exactly 37 days. The tower was called Roan Mountain Station, sits on the Tennessee-North Carolina border, roughly 6,300 feet. The cabin, older than most, built in the late 1970s, solar-powered with backup batteries. Standard two-way radio. Phone line that rarely had service. A backup radio that technically wasn't supposed to be used constantly, but got used anyway. The first month was exactly what I needed. I watched the forest, monitored weather, kept the radio on channel 16. The silence was profound. Therapeutic in the truest sense. Not the kind of therapeutic that comes from processing, but the kind that comes from simply being allowed to exist without anyone needing anything from you. I slept better than I had in years. My anxiety, which had been my constant companion for the better part of a decade, seemed to ease the moment I climbed those tower steps for the first time. In early June, I noticed the radio was behaving strangely. It would crackle with static, and then underneath the static, I'd hear what sounded like voices. Not clear voices, not actual conversations, more like the distant remnant of a signal, the way a radio station bleeds through from another frequency when the signal is weak. Auditory noise, nothing concerning. My supply driver, a quiet man named Gary, said the radios up here often picked up unusual frequencies because of the elevation and the mineral deposits in the surrounding mountains. Normal. But the pattern didn't feel random. The voices would appear at specific times, not every day but regularly, around 11 at night, and again around 4 in the morning. They'd be there for 5 or 10 minutes, and then disappear. No pattern in the content. I could never make out words, just the quality of voice underneath the static. Multiple voices, sometimes talking over each other, sometimes just one voice speaking at length. I started keeping a log of when they appeared. Tuesday and Friday nights, strongest Wednesday nights, nothing. The pattern was deliberate. I never went back. I finished my therapy certification instead, and went back to work in that field. I stopped seeking silence. I went back to listening to people, which turned out to be less exhausting than I remembered. But sometimes, late at night, I'll hear a radio in the background of something. A television show, a commercial, a video clip, and I'll hear that particular quality of static, that specific sound of voices underneath the white noise, and I'll change the channel or turn it off. Because I understand now that some voices Once, you've heard them. Don't stop broadcasting just because you're not listening anymore. In, two accounts, two people, two different mountains in the same ancient forest. Robert felt something watching him from the trees for an entire summer. Claire heard something speaking to her through a radio that couldn't record what it said. Neither of them can prove what they experienced. Neither of them needs to. Because here is the detail that connects both of their stories, and that I want you to sit with before you go to sleep tonight. Both of them spoke with a ranger named Michael. Robert in 2009, Claire in 2015, 6 years apart. The same man, who gave both of them the same measured response. Who asked both of them the same question: does it feel like it's trying to hurt you? As if he had been asking that question for years. As if he already knew the answer both times. Michael retired from the Great Smoky Mountains Ranger Service in 2019. I found his name in public records. I sent him a letter asking if he would speak with me about what lookout observers had reported over the years. He responded, one sentence. It said, "Whatever is on that mountain has been there longer than the towers, longer than the park, longer than any record anyone has kept. It is patient because it has always had time. Don't go looking for it. It will find you when it's ready." I don't go to the Great Smoky Mountains. I don't drive mountain roads at night. I don't seek out silence the way I used to. But sometimes, very late at night, when everything is quiet, I feel it. That low, steady pressure at the edge of awareness. The sensation of being the object of attention. Not in my line of sight. The object, the focus, the subject of something patient and intelligent observing from a distance. It has chosen for exactly this purpose. And I remind myself, the same thing Robert reminded himself, the same thing Claire reminded herself, that the door is locked, that the stairs are empty, that the radio is just static, and that some things, once they have found you, don't stop watching just because you walked away. The question I keep coming back to is this. Robert left in September of 2009. Claire left in July of 2015, 6 years apart. Both left early. Both left shaken. Both left changed in ways they still cannot fully explain. There have been 12 fire lookout observers stationed across the towers of the Great Smoky Mountains between 2009 and today. Michael's letter mentioned that number. He said, not all 12 experienced something, but the ones who did always had one thing in common. They came looking for silence. So, if you ever find yourself wanting to disappear for a while, wanting to climb high enough that the noise of the world can't follow you, I want you to remember one thing. The silence up there is not empty. It has never been empty. It is full of something that has been waiting quietly, patiently, for someone to come looking for it. Even if they didn't know, that's what they were doing. Even if they thought they were just looking for peace.